All right, so this lick is another great example of how Guthrie just weaves so many great ideas in a few short measures. And again, you can just pull out little concepts and work on just those ideas and experiment and explore with them. So what he does basically, he starts out by going. Right? So right there, the first concept is throwing in some, he's just walking up a scale and he gets to the bending notes. And he just does this little chromatic movement, right? Instead of going, throws in two little chromatic notes. And that's a cool little way of, again, he's bouncing off of two different strings to move down to another position. And then he introduces some chromatic stuff again. So you have. And right there, he shifts to another position. Right? So he's going from one position to the next, but he's doing it in interesting ways. The first way was pivoting off of two strings. Then he just shifts in a big shift, but if you notice that shift point, he plays that E note on the D string, and then he jumps to the E note on the G string. So you have the D string E note and the G string E note. So you get this little unison thing, right? And if you also notice, he goes down chromatically, then he walks up chromatically. So it's kind of like a call and response thing. Right? So the whole thing is. Now, right there, he does another thing where he comes down. He gets that unison note again. So now he's getting an A note on the B string, 10th fret, and then the A note on the 12th fret, on the 14th fret of the G string. And then he slides that down. He actually picks that note, but he gets a little bit of a slide before he picks that. Right? So you have. Then he does a slide again to switch positions. So you see how he's getting into all these things where he's switching positions by doing sometimes a unison note, sometimes he's doing those pivot notes. Right? He does a little call and response. Right? It's just really, really cool ways of traveling up and down the fretboard. All right, so a few measures further down in this solo, Guthrie gets into a cool little bit of phrasing right before he runs up an arpeggio. And I found that the cool part about this was, again, a lot of people will play scales, runs, and then they'll get into an arpeggio and they'll just kind of run up the arpeggio. But he kind of phrases right before it, and he sits on a note. He plays a note a few times, which a lot of people don't do. Again, we're playing all these things, but we don't pound on a single note in our improvisation, and Guthrie does that a lot. And so this sequence basically goes. Then he gets into that little fast run. But if you notice what he did here, he sat on that 11th fret on the G string for a few seconds, and it just gives him time to go between his phrasing and the arpeggio that he runs up. It's just really cool, because if he didn't do that, it would have sounded great, but it ends up being this one smooth line as opposed to sitting there for a second. And he's just really running up what could look like basically a G major 7 arpeggio. And then what he does too, when he gets down that, when he walks down the scale after that arpeggio, he walks down chromatically, and then he does a pivot thing again from the B and the G string. Then he does, right, he does that little chromatic 3-note thing again. So he has, and if you notice here too, he did the same thing. He did that little, he played the B note here on the D string, and then he shifts position to the B note on the G string. And he did that call and response again. So, right? So it's this repeating of little patterns and motifs, but it goes by so quickly that you don't hear any of those patterns. And that little unison jump is a really cool thing, because when you get those two notes that are the same pitch on different strings, it's kind of like a saxophone kind of technique.